Johnson's career. Let's move forward 5 years to Havana, Cuba. A 37-year-old Jack Johnson at the end of his career in round 21 of a scheduled 45-round bout against Jess Willard.
Yes, and Johnson at this point throwing combinations which are unheard of at this time, 1915. But I think this effort had just made Johnson totally exhausted. Here we are in round 26. Watch for the Willard right hand. Oh.
And watch for one more thing. Look at Jack Johnson's legs. Right there at the count of 4, they relax. And really, that marked the end of the era of Jack Johnson. Mike, in the years after the Willard fight, Jack Johnson claimed that he threw the fight. What's your opinion?
Well, you know, it's very difficult for me to believe that, Alex, because it was a hot, scorching sun in Havana at that time, and Johnson had fought with all his heart and soul for 26 rounds, and I could believe he could have made it a great deal easier on both of them if he'd have went down in the first round and lasted 26 rounds.
Jack Dempsey was world heavyweight champion from 1919 to 1926, a unique era beginning with the return of American troops from World War I, which ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles by President Wilson and the other world powers in 1919. And America went on the post-war binge known as the Roaring Twenties, with flappers dancing the Charleston and Black Bottom, and gangsters such as Al Capone defying prohibition with rivers of bootleg whiskey. It was also an era known as the Golden Age of sports, with such legendary names as Babe Ruth in baseball, Red Grange, the Galloping Ghost, and Knute Rockne of Notre Dame in football, the great thoroughbred man of war, Big Bill Tilden in tennis, and the immortal Bobby Jones in golf. But no athlete surpassed the public appeal of a hungry young kid named William Harrison Dempsey from a Colorado mining town, whose family traveled west in a covered wagon to seek their fortune. But young Jack discovered his fortune in his fists. He began fighting in Western saloons at age 15, and 9 years later he claimed boxing's biggest prize by destroying the man who had beaten Jack Johnson, the giant Jess Willard. Dempsey's two-fisted assault was relentless, and his dramatic victory elevated him to folk hero status. When he met the challenge of Georges Carpentier in 1921, the crowd of 90,000 paid an unheard of $1.7 million at the gate. 2 years later, 125,000 people stormed the gates of the Polo Grounds in New York City to see one of the most incredible rounds in boxing history, as Dempsey knocked down Louis Firpo, the Wild Bull of the Pampas, 7 times in the first round. Later in the round, the tables turned as Dempsey was knocked out of the ring. But he climbed back and stopped Firpo in the second round, tightening his stranglehold on the title and on the public. But the champion turned increasingly away from boxing. He married actress Estelle Taylor, which led him to try his hand at a Hollywood career. And he worked harder in this scene with Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks Sr. than defending his title. Finally, after 3 years without a fight, he met Gene Tunney before an incredible crowd of 135,000 fans in Philadelphia. But the champion's long layoff and the challenger's boxing skill resulted in a one-sided Tunney victory. Jack Dempsey had 2 more bouts, including his famous long count fight in his unsuccessful rematch with Tunney, and then retired from the ring. He opened a restaurant in New York City where he held court for a parade of the famous and colorful personalities of the day. Jack Dempsey died in 1983 at the age of 88.
Mike, they say that Jack Dempsey changed the face of the sport forever with a style that the public had never seen before. What was so unusual about Jack Dempsey?
Well, Jack Dempsey had the most unique distinction as being such a whirlwind, action-packed fighter, because of the fighters before his time, just a little bit before him, was very conservative fighters at that time. And Dempsey was just an action-packed fighter, the fighter that the people loved to see, and they weren't used to that type of fighting, and America fell in love with him.
That style really made its debut when Jack Dempsey fought the first time for the heavyweight championship of the world against Jess Willard.
Look at Willard on the right. Look at the size difference between the two. I think it was 45 pounds.
Yeah, Jess Willard at 6'6.5" was the tallest heavyweight champion in history.
But there, look at the combinations right here. This is what made Jack Dempsey such exciting and a great fighter. Just the ferociousness in him, waiting for his opponent to get up like a tiger.
They say that the phrase killer instinct was first used to describe Jack Dempsey, and you can see why from this round 1 against Willard.
Yes, Alex, and it's rounds like this that made the public love Dempsey so much, and this is why I loved him so much.
Amazingly, Willard survived this savage beating into round 4, but couldn't answer the bell, and Jack Dempsey became the new champion. 2 years later, boxing's first $1 million gate at Boyle's 30 Acres in Jersey City, as the consummate boxer, the light heavyweight champion, Georges Carpentier, challenged Jack Dempsey for his title.
Well, in the early rounds, we see Carpentier giving a good account of himself here, beating Jack Dempsey to the punch, hurting him, boxing masterfully. And right here, Dempsey's about to come back and catch him with a right hand. All right, and here we go right here, and that took a lot out of Carpentier.
And so did the body punches of Dempsey as the fight wore on. Here's action in round 4.
Well, Alex, we could see it didn't matter if he fought a menacing giant like Willard or else an agile boxer like Carpentier. He just threw punches with bad intention.
And he continues to throw him there. The right hand dropped Carpentier. Watch here, there was still no neutral corner rule. So Dempsey is out of your picture on the left, waiting to pounce on Carpentier. Carpentier fakes like he's out and then jumps up ready to go, but that final body punch finished him. And Carpentier wasn't faking here. He really was gone.
And as we can see, Dempsey was just a savage puncher. With anything, any punch he threw could take you out.
Another trademark of Jack Dempsey, helping up his fallen and beaten opponent.
And that's something that we call a bloodthirsty gentleman.
And now, perhaps the most famous round in boxing history. Round 7 of Dempsey's second fight against Gene Tunney, who had outpointed Jack and taken his title a year earlier. And at this stage, Tunney in the white trunks appeared totally in command.
Dempsey is very frustrated by the superior boxing skills of Gene Tunney, but now you see he's about to catch up and land a vicious combination that puts Tunney down for the knockdown.
And now the famous long count. Dempsey forgot the new neutral corner rule and stood over the fallen Tunney. The referee didn't start the count until Dempsey finally went to the farthest neutral corner. And Tunney got valuable seconds to recover himself. Here you see him with his wits about him, up at the count of 9 and back on his bicycle.
Even though he never was able to catch Tunney again, despite losing a 10-round decision, Jack Dempsey remained the most exciting and popular fighter of the era.
Mike, when you look back at the whole of Jack Dempsey's career, the thing that jumps out at you is he was always exciting. Do you feel a responsibility not just to win your fights, but also to entertain?
Absolutely. Any fighter in general would think their main objective is to make the audience go home and let them know they had witnessed something that was incredibly special. And every time the fighters fight, this person will be a lifelong fan. And this is what made Jack Dempsey a $1 million box office and a legendary fighter.
Of all the great victories in his career, Joe Louis always said that this victory over Max Schmeling was the sweetest. And then in 1941, the famous match against former light heavyweight champion Billy Conn, who had Joe Louis flustered with his boxing skills and hurt here in round 12 with his power. Seemingly, Billy Conn was in control of this fight. And in round 13, he came out to finish Joe Louis instead of trying to hold on for a decision. And that was his downfall.
As you can see, Billy Conn made a big mistake by trying to put pressure on and fighting Joe Louis. And in Joe Louis' prime, he made people pay for their mistakes, as we're about to see right here.
What we also see, Mike, is what you spoke about earlier. The pinpoint accuracy of Joe Louis. He just never seemed to waste a punch. And that right hand did away with the dream of Billy Conn. A decade later, in the final fight of his career, Joe Louis was knocked out by a young slugger named Rocky Marciano. It was the end of one era and the beginning of another.
Rocky Marciano wore the heavyweight crown from 1952 to 1956 and was the only champion to retire undefeated. It was a time when the United States Army was fighting its second war in a decade, this time in Korea. And a former general, Dwight D. Eisenhower, was elected president to lead the country through the war years and into a time of prosperity. The Red Scare was epitomized by the witch hunts of Senator Joseph McCarthy. Elizabeth II was crowned Queen of England, and an American actress named Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier of Monaco. Elvis Presley triggered a revolution in music called rock and roll, and the vaccine of Dr. Jonas Salk revolutionized the war on polio. In sports, the 4-minute mile barrier was finally broken by Roger Bannister on a cool afternoon in England. And the Yankee dynasty continued to dominate baseball as Billy Martin drove in the winning run in the 1953 World Series, their 5th straight. And in boxing, it was a frustrated high school baseball player from Brockton, Massachusetts, Rocky Marciano, who punched his way to the top of the heavyweight ranks. He had won 42 straight when he fought Jersey Joe Walcott for the title. Behind on points in the 13th round, Rocky was finally able to land the right hand he called Susie Q. Many people consider it the hardest single punch in boxing history. Of his 6 title defenses, only 1 went the distance, his first with Ezra Charles, and after 15 hard-fought rounds, Rocky captured a unanimous decision. Less than 2 years later, in 1956, Rocky shocked the boxing world by announcing his retirement because of back problems, managerial disputes, and pressure from his wife Barbara. Despite huge offers, Rocky made his retirement stick, devoting his time to a series of business ventures. His only